There's never been a place I've ever seen in this world that I loved as much as I love these mountains, and Todd in particular.
We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children.
A society is defined not only by what it creates, but by what it refuses to destroy.
I've lost money for 16 months, and I doubt if we'll go through another winter.
The development that's here next to me and behind me, they blasted rock for 3 months.
This would have never happened if the younger generation hadn't gotten greedy.
I don't want any more housing developments.
We're being invaded by people with different cultures.
I'm here because I want to be here, and I plan to stay here and want my children and my children's children to be here.
This region is a place that is part of a global society, and everything that happens here is happening because they're global forces that are driving it.
The people that have lived here a long time may feel like people from outside are coming and taking over. I hope not.
It's a quandary, and we're at a real crossroads, not unlike a lot of other small rural communities. So what we thought we'd do is go talk to some people, ask some questions, do a lot of listening, and maybe through that we can better understand our story and where we've been, where we are now, and maybe where we're going in the future. In the high northwest mountains of what's now North Carolina, a 300 million year old dance of water carving through ancient amphibolite rock form the valleys of the South Fork of the New River and its tributary Elk Creek.
It looks like the first humans came to this region after, well, maybe at the very end of the Ice Age of the Pleistocene epoch. We do find some artifacts, just a scattering of them here and there, one spear point, one scraper, dating to probably about 12, 13,000 years ago. And those are often made out of rocks that are from far away from here. So it looks like people are moving through here on a seasonal basis.
When I'd tell them I'm from the mountains of North Carolina, they'd say, "Do you really marry your sisters down there?"
All of us carry around remnants of stereotypes about Appalachia that were really created in the late 19th century. And I kind of would like to start there. They were created pretty much after the Civil War. The local color fiction writers, which was an important movement in American fiction, would come into southern Appalachia.
Alas, Elk Crossroads is a dirty grocery store encumbered with dry good boxes, fly-blown goods, flies, and loafers.
Then in the 20th century, with the motion picture industry, started to make their way into American popular culture.
Little Abner, yoo-hoo, little Abner, yoo-hoo. Every gal in town is after little Abner.
Is you very hungry this morning, son?
Not ravenous, Mammy, just kinda.
Pappy, is ya? He sure do try my patience. you coming, Pansy? I sure is hungry.
I reckons we has the finest food in all the world. Pork chops and eggs for breakfast, pork chops and goobers for lunch, and for supper, more pork chops.
But you see these stereotypes, and they're about, you know, colorful, creative people, but they're quaint, and they're backwards, and they're white, and they're isolated, and they're a little ignorant, and they're passive pawns in the system. And most of that is not true. So what I'd like to think about is the diversity. I mean, start with the whole idea of whiteness. And if you think about what has been important in Appalachia, we really have to start with Native American presence.
I've not seen any evidence that Cherokees lived here in prehistory or in early history. I see lots of evidence that Siouan-speaking people may have lived here in the northwestern counties in prehistory, like the Kiawe, the Sara, the Occaneechi. And so whenever anybody up here says that, you know, I'm descended from the Cherokees and this is where the Cherokees lived, I'm like, that's interesting. It's between 900 AD and 1300 AD that we start to see our first villages, and there are probably many of them in the Todd area on the floodplains of the South Fork of the New River, and maybe even on some of the larger creeks. And isolated houses as well, like the house that's at the prehistoric house that we identified at Rob Griffith and Diane Price's place, and we call that the Katie Griffith site, named for their daughter. That was a house site, a residence, and I got several carbon dates from that site that were right at 1300 AD. So at that time, there are villages and houses, permanent structures, year-round residences that the Indians occupied. But it was short-lived because just after that is when the Little Ice Age began. Once again, people moved to lower elevations and then used these higher elevations only seasonally on into the Little Ice Age, which lasted until the Industrial Revolution. And when Spangenberg came in 1751, admittedly it was winter, but he saw no signs of humans when he got into these higher elevations.
The first Europeans in the area were Spanish explorers. They were seeking gold and riches. The Spanish were followed by the British and the French, who competed against each other over control of a lucrative fur trade. The frontier opened to settlement as the American Revolution closed, and the first permanent settlers were a diverse mix. They were of German, English, French Huguenot, Scots-Irish, and African descent.
We tend to think of Scots-Irish and German, but you had a real important mixture.
They arrived from the Piedmont to the east, the rolling hills of Virginia to the north, and by way of the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania. The region offered them vast boundaries of land and the opportunity to create new wealth in a new world.
The earliest settlers came, some have called them, there's a historical sociologist, Wilma Dunaway, who calls them settler capitalists. And she said people came to settle in the Americas in order to create wealth.
They filtered into the mountains and settled where the land was fertile and mostly flat, along the banks of the New River, up the valleys along the creeks, and deep in the hollers near the springs that fed the cold mountain streams. The The fertile mountain land was ideal for raising hogs, sheep, and cattle. The area was one of the largest producers of pork to the east coast because the floor of the great chestnut oak forest, called the mast, was perfect for foraging pigs.
And the people who would come first generally were the people with the most wealth, who could buy the largest acreage of land. And then over the next generations, they succeeded in consolidating that wealth through careful marriages. So we kind of think another stereotype about Appalachia is that this is this great egalitarian society, and it was really never so.
After the war was over and the scalawags were coming through and raiding and taking everything that was available, somehow the people in this area had an arrangement by which they would notify ahead of time if a group of those people were on their way through.
So after the Civil War, the mountain counties are devastated. They're devastated by the loss of sons and fathers and growing seasons and livestock and trust.
Northern soldiers burned the house down out here and left our people with nothing. Took their meat and the horses and burned a lot of their clothes and left my grandparents with nothing.
If they got word that the raiders were coming, they drove the cattle out into the river swamps where they'd grown up around. The hogs and everything were driven off where they weren't available. But her father always had to have him some homemade whiskey. And he had a small keg that he kept handy for his nightly drams, his nightcaps. And they had one Negro slave, and that slave's one job was to get his little whiskey keg and put it in a big hollow tree out in the yard.
As industrialization took hold, speculators mined for minerals. The virgin eastern hardwoods and the predominant American chestnut, which would succumb to blight in just a few decades, made timber a lucrative trade. Timber barons brought in a train to harvest the hillsides of millions of board feet of hardwood lumber, especially the American chestnut. In 1910, the Carolina-Virginia Railway announced the company would lay tracks from West Jefferson to Elkland Station in Todd. The coming of the railroad transformed the little crossroads community into a boom town, as the timber that clothed the surrounding mountains yielded lumber, tan bark, pulpwood, and extract. To support the boom and to share in the profits anticipated from the railroad, Todd expanded, and the village was soon a thriving place with several stores, doctors, a dentist, hotels, even a bank.
People have looked back at Appalachia and seen it as a depopulated place where nothing was kind of happening until the late 20th century. And yet I feel like the turn of the century was a time when the population reached its maximum in southern Appalachia. You had a rural population that was dynamic because you had little villages with a post office, a store, a church, and maybe one or two other little businesses, and a school.
Was there a lot of community gatherings back then, or was it everybody had their own, busy with their own families and farms and things, or how was the...
Well, the church was the social center of the...
Sure, our prayer meetings, we all worship together, you know. We have a prayer meeting in the Baptist church, and we're known as holiness people. And we go to the Baptist church, and the Baptists, then the next night they come to the Tabernacle church, and the next night we go to the Methodist church, and we worship all the way around. And nobody knows whether Uncle Ed belongs to the Baptist church or the Methodist church. And I don't know whether the Baptist church belongs to our tabernacle or the Baptist church. We don't pay no attention to that. We just worship God.
There was a church for about anybody. Episcopal Church, Methodist Church, Baptist Church, Holiness Church.
Yeah, there was.
We were well churched.
When we'd have parties of the night,
Barn dances.
play the banjo and fiddle, violin, the fiddle, that we just called it fiddle, and danced all night. Thank God, had a good time.
Todd wasn't always Todd. When the post office was first established here in 1838, the community was called Elk Crossroads. A half century later, the town was renamed Todd in honor of Joseph Warren Todd, a native son who was credited with helping to reestablish order after the Civil War. And for a short time in the early 20th century, the community was called Elkland, a name given by the railroad company because as local legend goes, the town had to have a two-syllable name. In just a handful of years, the great hardwood forest had been stripped away, and the railroad company was losing money running the extra 14 miles of track to Todd.
How did people feel about the railroad here in Todd?
Well, they wanted it to come in, you know. They didn't know it was going to ruin us and take all of our timber out and leave us nothing, but we thought it was the remedy, you know. We wanted it to come in.
So you think after it left it was bad?
Yeah, it left us in a lot worse shape. All of our timber gone and got nothing to show for it.
Where we made the mistake was selling every stick of timber we had here for a railroad and letting companies come in here and carry it off, haul it off on the train out away from here, and wouldn't let companies come in here. We could have had factories, all kinds of furniture factories up here and everything. If we'd have been hadn't loved our little dirts, we loved the dirt better than we loved.
They wanted to buy land,
and we wouldn't sell them no land, and that's the reason our children now had to reap the results of it. They had to get an education and go somewhere else to get a job.
Once the train left, the town's commerce all but vanished nearly overnight. What the train didn't take away was washed away in a horrific flood at the close of the Great Depression.
Told God and to myself, this is the last time I'll ever see Todd if it don't quit raining. And that night, 2 or 3 buildings went out of Todd all together like an arc, went right down the stream all together. And there was a mill there, big mill there. Took that mill out, store there on the side of the creek, well away from the water, took the store just like an arc floating down, and went on out. But God ceased the rain is the only reason that Todd didn't wash away.
Gravestone they have found is 1732. We think our ancestors came to the Todd area in the late 1600s. We don't know exactly what year.
I think it's great, you know, being able to tread where my grandfather tread, where my great-grandfather tread.
We go back to the 1800s here. Grandpa, he was born in 1872.
During the Depression, we grew about everything we used.
In the fall, digging a hole to put the potatoes in, and we would have enough potatoes all winter long. We'd go dig a little deeper.
Yeah. Families back then would come together and would all build a house together using whatever they could get from the land.
They were farmers. All of this was cabbage and corn and potatoes and a few beef cattle.
And they were producing for a global market from the very beginning. People were never self-sufficient.
That's what people done for a living here then, was gathered roots and herbs. And they bought everything just about.
Buying roots and herbs and stuff like that, because people would put dry on top and some beadwood leaves that they'd just pulled down in the bottom, so they'd trick you if you didn't watch what you was doing.
And we raised cabbage, delivered them to the kraut factory for 1/4 cent a pound.
This land up here was considered basically worthless. That's kind of the feeling that I had when I was growing up. If you bought land up here at that time, you bought it cheap because it was hard to farm.
What would happen with mountain agriculture is that it would expand and expand as families are growing in size, so that you need a large labor force for farming, until it would reach the limits of the ecosystem.
Get up at 5 o'clock to go milk the cows, and in the afternoon, the first thing after school, you go hunt the cows on the hill.
So it was pretty much a farm life. It was building fences and bringing in hay and stuff all the time. It's the reason I'm not farming now.
By the 1940s and 50s, the mountain family farms could no longer compete in the global market. And at the same time, the young men and women who had left home during World War II, many of them decided to stay away because there were better jobs and a different lifestyle in other places. As a result, there was a large decrease in population among the young and the working age here. In Ashe County, for instance, they lost about 10% of the population. And in Watauga County, it was 4%.
Then he went to Coatesville, Pennsylvania. About half of Todd went to Coatesville, Pennsylvania to get him a job during World War II.
In the second half of the 20th century, Todd and the rest of the region underwent tremendous change. Beginning in the early 1960s, many area farmers started cultivating Christmas trees, and at the same time, the establishment of ski slopes in the Boone area was the seed for an ever-growing winter tourist season. The area's population boomed, and as the folk revival of the 1960s grew nationally, many who identified with the Back to the Land movement turned to the mountains of North Carolina to find a simpler life. In 1962, 2 dams were proposed for construction on the New River near the North Carolina-Virginia border, which would have flooded 42,000 acres. Because of a 13-year public outcry, the dam project was stopped and a 26.5-mile section of the river was designated as a federal scenic river. In the mid-1980s, Watauga, Ashe, and Allegheny counties were studied as a potential site for a low-level nuclear waste dump. Like the dam project, public opinion galvanized to defeat the plan. Meanwhile, a developer's plan to build a 218-unit condominium on Sugar Mountain prompted rage in state legislation, now called the Ridge Law, to regulate mountaintop development. The region, branded the High Country, continued to grow. Appalachian State University in Boone boosted enrollment throughout the period. The construction of the region's first 4-lane highway connected the area to North Carolina's Piedmont and created faster, easier access to the mountains. No farms, no foods is a fairly simple concept. It's if we don't have farms, we're not going to have food.
Where is the food going to come from? We need to have land for food production here in this country. And that is at the core of the American Farmland Trust's work.
That's the heart of all this, is the land and the soil. And that's what we need to protect and steward, every single one of us. Without land, we are nothing.
And so as our urban and suburban areas continue to grow, we have to realize that we need to protect those farmlands if we want to continue to enjoy the food on our tables.
In the last decade, the boom that hit the rest of the country hit Todd too. Residential subdivisions sprouted up on old family farms, and today half the land is owned by non-residents. The changing landscape has created divisions and raised issues about the land and us.
I know the people from Todd have been active in trying to keep their community the way it was, and that is good. And I'd like to see Todd stay the way it was, but I can see it changing.
It was a sad day when my stepdad, he just got to the place that he couldn't take care of all those cattle, and they decided to sell them. And so when they did, they knew that the meadow and the hill would probably grow up, you know, and weeds and everything. And they sold all the land down on the riverbank.
It has helped a lot of the older people who have quit farming, sold their farms, and give them a retirement, because that was their 401k.
But I wish the people here wouldn't sell their land to strangers.
It wasn't practical to continue farming it, and I think we decided the best use of it was to do some sort of a development at the time that was fairly lucrative.
I really do not appreciate the construction going on and the land development over the mountain, because it's taking away the beauty of Todd.
I said, that was our grandparents' land. I said, I don't want to sell it. I said, it belonged to our grandparents, maybe our great-grandparents. I don't know. I said, does that not mean anything to you?
Developers have just come in to try to make a quick buck and not care about the community, not care about the land.
I am one of the developers of the development, which started in 1999 when we acquired the land, and we basically acquired 450 acres as the initial tract. It was designed as a low impact development. There are only 28 home sites on the property. We're not holding developers accountable to the quality of the community and its sustainability for the long term. I've used the analogy of farmers and miners. Miners just take from the land. Farmers take something from the land, but they put something back into it. And I think we need to come up with a model that encourages developers to have somewhat of a farmer mentality.
I think people who are part of the development, I think it's a common philosophy that they want it to stop as soon as they get their piece. And I will admit that, I feel that way a little bit.
And I would hate to say that I was against development, because we wouldn't be living in the house that we're living in, without it.
The development has bothered me a lot. It has bothered me an awfully lot. The Laurel Knob is an example where people ruined the ridge lines.
The people came into this area looked for two things, I think. They looked for water and a place below the mountain where the wind went over them instead of blew them away. Today, the people that are migrating here, they want one right on top of the mountain.
I think that's one of the problems with the tendency to put a subdivision or a gated community on the top of a mountain and then close it off. Build a wall or put a gate up. It's not the fact of people wanting to live on the top of the mountain that's problematic. It's not letting people access the places of their childhood.
Instead of seeing the ridge line now, I look up there and I see a house sitting on top of it.
That completely cuts off what was a community commons, a public space where all were welcome, anybody could be there. People tell you their stories of going camping, of going hiking.
And Haskell remembers we used to walk to the Bald in the summertime to pick blueberries, and just to be there. It was magnificent view.
Yeah. We used to go out and camp up there.
Yeah.
I think I see it from both sides. And part of it has to do with an attachment to the land that the folks who have been here have had.
And I did not want it developed. I wanted it to stay just like it was. I wanted to be a place on this earth, and I've told a lot of people, I said, as long as I've got control of it, that will be one place on this earth that'll be like God made it.
It's a feeling in some ways that if those newcomers hadn't come in, then our taxes wouldn't be so high, and we wouldn't have to pay so much for things.
The tourists have caused the price to go up so they can afford it because they had good jobs.
We've got more people coming in, which gives us a better tax base. Of course, you have to look at it like that.
I've seen it in numerous communities across the state. County government will get focused on growth and real estate development in particular is the fuel for the growth, and yet many times that tax base produces a revenue stream that government will then invest in a number of amenities which can't be sustained for the long term.
And I guess it's helped the tax base. We don't see it much here helping anything.
In other ways, if there wasn't the new homes and the second homes that have come here, then a lot of folks wouldn't have work.
But the development has been good. It's been good for the builders. The real estate market has really boomed here in Ashe County. The negative side is that the land is so costly, it's hard for the local people and young people starting out to get a home.
It's hard to hold back progress. Already, our national heritage river, which we almost worship here in Todd, all the memories that we have of it. Now they want to take 3 or 4 million gallons of water a day out of the river.
Our ancestors said they wasn't making any more land to hold on to it.
Native people do not want they do not want to be told what to do or how their property can be used or sold. Or
if we sustain the way of life with openness and green spaces and so forth, I think we're going to have to take a look at land use planning.
But if we take the time to just enter into a conversation and talk about the things that are important to us, those things which we value, then we can make efforts to move in a direction that is protecting that part of this community which we value so dearly, without it having to be mandated by law, but merely being a choice that each of us make as individuals because of what we value so much here.
One of the things that I wish that we had done in the past was limit the building on the river and on the creeks because of the dangers of floodwaters, and on the steep slopes. As far as building on the mountaintops, I have nothing against that as long as it's not above the tree levels.
Without that conversation, we are destined to have results on land use that in the long term don't serve anybody's best interest.
We have interests that intersect in the mountains and that need to be negotiated through, careful conversations. You have long-time residents of this area, I dare not say traditional culture, but long-time residents who are part of the community's memory. They know the past. They know the secret places. They know the invisible landscapes.
The meadow out here between the house and the highway was a wilderness full of sawbriars and rhododendron.
And that was the old ford, and the road went right along the base of that hill.
He carried the mail from Todd to Creston. And at that time, he had to walk. And people would order these tires for their vehicles from Montgomery Ward in Baltimore. And that poor old man would put one or two around his neck and walk from Creston to Todd.
I remember you told me once when I guess your grandfather died and your grandmother did something for the bees to...
Oh yes, she was one of the old believers. She really believed in that if the master of the house died, if someone didn't tell the bees that the master was dead, they'd leave. So I remember her donning her black cape, and I can see her today caning out there and crooning something to the bees to the effect, "Pretty bees, you must stay, even though your master's gone away."
He was pretty much a pioneer doctor for this area. A lot of times he would be out so late. I remember my mom telling me that the horse was trained to bring him home, so he would sleep on the horse on his way home, and several times they would have to knock the ice off of his boots to free him from the horse.
When he picked a switch from one of his patients' homes and used it to switch his horse, when he came home he stuck it in the ground and it grew all those forsythias.
Then you have newcomers who have come in to create a new world for themselves.
I think like everyone else that are transplants here, we moved here for the magical, beautiful nature of Todd.
I can run around and feel safe and not feel like my mom has to know what I'm doing every second of the day.
And they often come not seeking community, but seeking respite from community.
We were looking for an escape, a pause in a go, go, go life. Push the pause button in a beautiful place.
Seeking the experience of wilderness, seeking solitude.
We were looking for a place that was much more a focus on rural lifestyle as opposed to a resort lifestyle.
It's quiet, there's no traffic, or it's not hot.
We find the biggest pro of being in the Todd area is the access to so many different outdoor activities.
And yet they've moved into communities and they need to negotiate those communities and understand the the value of community.
Not like neighbors used to be. They just come and go.
The people who move here, especially people who have vacation houses or second homes, they're not invested in the community, and they don't try to become part of the community.
I live in Charlotte, and there are parts of Charlotte where people don't even know their neighbors.
I'm not situated to describe the sense of community in Todd. I see little peaks of it by going to the concerts in the summer, visiting the bakery, riding my bike on the railroad grade. But I'm not equipped to answer that. I'm not a part of it.
If you go out right now and check the names on all those people who do all this volunteering, most of them, 90% of them, are folks who have moved into the county, second home people and people who've come in to stay.
I often give presentations about human use of the mountains here, human settlement in prehistory. I often give those presentations to some of our migrant residents, people from Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and I tell them, you guys are smart, just like the Indians were. You know, this was no place to be in the wintertime.
You know, sometimes you can become lethargic in certain aspects of life and community, and you don't move it forward, but I think they've been pushers, you know, to help us move things forward, like schools, good schools, and they support the infrastructure, you know, that's necessary to make parks and recreation and so forth. So I see it all as a plus.
Community means, for me personally, it really is a sense of caring.
My father-in-law was talking to one of his neighbors who was a sheep farmer, and they had been neighbors and collaborators for 40 years, and he says to his neighbor, do you reckon I'll ever be considered part of the community? And the elder guy said, Ashby, I don't think you'll live long enough. Which was, I think, a really telling commentary. Do we let people in?
The people that live here are the glue, you know what I mean, that hold it together. I still think there needs to be an overwhelming base of folks that live here all the time. I mean, to keep the community together.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you could do that with people that were in and out all the time.
Turn around and promenade the other way. Now back out, join in a great big circle, go into the center for a great big shout. One more time, in the middle. Do-si-do, your partner. Give her your right hand, A, E, I, O.
In the future, I think it's important that here in the Todd community we preserve what's already here, the natural beauty and the cultural heritage that we enjoy. And at the same time, it's important that we find a way to have a sustainable economy here year-round that's not boom and bust as it has been for the last 100 years.
Well, I would like to see a development that would take care of supplying jobs for our young people. We educate them and leave and lose them.
I think Ashe County is going more to a service-oriented workforce.
In order to have close to full employment, you've got to have industry. We can't all be in service jobs, and it saddens me to see industry disappearing.
As we get more second home owners, you're going to have people to keep up your property, maintenance work, different things like that.
I understand that it's difficult to own a successful business in Todd through the winter months. So, I would love to see more businesses and things going on, but hopefully maybe with some of the new folks coming in, there'll be more support.
I own the Todd Mercantile and Bakery. It's a small business in Todd. I'm self-employed, just me. And I sell local arts and crafts and have a small bakery that serves the community and visitors alike.
When I moved over here, I had no dream of renting boats and things. I wanted to teach fly fishing. I wanted to take people fishing. I wanted to provide a place for people to buy fishing licenses and so forth. But since there was a kayak rental place here before, every other person that would come in wanted to rent a boat. And I would say, well, no, but I'll take you fishing.
A lot of ideas about how to create a more sustainable community are percolating today. One idea is a system of trails, parks, greenways, and blueways that closely parallel the historic uses of the river and the ridgetops. It is hoped that building a bridge to the past could offer us the key to the future.
I mean, these are the headwaters of the New River. Connect Blowing Rock to Boone and then connect Boone to Todd. And we're working on a series of greenways all throughout the county, a series of other paddle trails and hiking trails. So for me as a planner, I mean, this project in and of itself is part of a bigger vision and a long-term strategy for Watauga County. I mean, it is a significant element of our economic development strategy.
And as I rented those 2 boats out, I bought another boat, and I bought another boat, and I bought another boat, and 4 years later, I'm up to 60-something boats, and so I'm very thankful. It's doing very well.
And that 22-mile stretch between Boone to Todd has a lot of implications for the town of Boone in itself and connecting its existing greenway. But what it would mean to the Todd community, I mean, it would open up a tremendous amount of doors, particularly from an economic development perspective. I mean, it would become the anchor, the economic development anchor for the community itself. And if you think about what the river already does for the Todd community, this is just another way for people to experience that river and to walk along it and see it. And you combine that with the quaintness and the charm and the character of Todd, which can't be recreated anywhere. And you've made a connection that is very unique, and yeah, it would be a game changer for the Todd community.
I would like to see that old roadbed that follows railroad grade eventually developed into a bike and hiking trail similar as they have over in Virginia.
There's one gentleman that lives at a certain place on the Creeper Trail that promises me every time I see him that if I ever mention opening it up, he'll shoot me.
The most significant effort on setting aside land for public access and protecting rare species of plants and animals is being coordinated by the North Carolina Nature Conservancy. And if you look at the greater Todd community, the Nature Conservancy has identified as a target area what they characterize as the New River headwaters is one of the most significant biologically distinct areas in the state of North Carolina.
The best things I see today are that a lot of young people are becoming really interested in sustaining agriculture.
I would love to farm and have a store. It's my dream to open a restaurant out here in Todd.
Would love to see more of the artistic bend that I think Todd is so known for.
Festivals that we do, the music series, seems to me we ought to do something a lot like they have with a crafts series as well.
I would like the animals to have a nice home at Todd. And I would like to have a pet store here in Todd. I would like to call it Pet Everything.
I'm not, like I said, against any kind of growth, but I would like to see a lot of this area be preserved for the future and for future generations to enjoy.
I hope that the river gets taken good care of.
I'd like for my kids to see what I got to enjoy.
I would like just more community involvement for the preservation of Todd and what it was and what it is and what it can be and what we can be known for.
Like the dramatic cycle of the seasons here in the mountains, people too will come and go, and some will stay and others will go back home. But everybody will impact our community and our landscape. If we can recognize these natural cycles and identify our common concerns, then maybe we'll be better able to adapt to change in the future.
I would hope that Todd could always be an island of peacefulness and slowed downness in a world that's going faster and faster all the time.
Mom, does that mean that Dad can still have a job even though there isn't so much building going on here?
I think it does, dear.